The intense and unrelenting July heat slammed into Brick Brody Harlo with the force of a physical blow the moment he stepped down from the military transport plane onto the tarmac at Fort Benning in Georgia. After enduring 3 incredibly demanding and dangerous tours of duty with the elite Army Rangers in some of the harshest and most hostile territories scattered across the Middle East, he had finally made it back to American soil. His heavy duffel bag felt almost weightless in comparison to the enormous emotional and mental burden he carried from everything he had witnessed, endured, and accomplished during those long 4 years away. Brody paused for a moment, taking in the familiar, yet strangely distant surroundings of the base. He pulled out his phone for the very first time since landing, eagerly anticipating a warm message from Melanie, the woman who had been his wife for 12 long years, confirming that she was already on her way to pick him up and bring him home to their family. Instead, what he read caused his stomach to plummet like a stone dropped into a deep well. The message was brutally short and ice-cold. Don't bother coming home. The locks have all been changed. The kids don't want anything to do with you anymore. It's completely over. He stood there completely motionless in the sweltering Georgia heat, the sun beating down mercilessly on his broad shoulders. All around him, fellow soldiers streamed past with joyful expressions, laughing and shouting as they rushed toward waiting families. Embraces and homecoming celebrations filled with balloons, signs, and tears of happiness. But for Brody, the words on his screen burned themselves permanently into his mind, replaying over and over like a looping nightmare. His thoughts raced frantically through every possible explanation or misunderstanding. Their last video call, which had taken place just 3 weeks earlier, had seemed relatively normal on the surface, even if a bit distant. Over the course of his final tour, their conversations had indeed become more strained and less frequent. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this level of sudden and total rejection. Brody's thumbs hovered uncertainly over the phone's keyboard as a flood of angry, hurt, and accusatory responses flashed through his head in rapid succession. He could have unleashed a torrent of questions, demands, or expressions of pain. Instead, after a long, deliberate pause, he typed just 2 simple yet loaded words in reply: "As you wish." Anyone who had served alongside Brody or knew him well would immediately recognize the quiet, understated danger hidden within those calm words. Throughout his distinguished career as an Army Ranger, he had earned a reputation for his remarkable, calculated precision under pressure. In moments when chaos exploded all around and other men might shout, panic, or lose control, Brody had a unique ability to grow unnervingly calm and focused, like the eye of a storm. "As you wish" was the exact phrase he had uttered more than once right before leading some of the most devastating and successful operations, executing them with the flawless precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It signaled that he had accepted the challenge and would now respond on his own carefully chosen terms. Without wasting another second, Brody made a single, decisive phone call. A crisp, professional female voice answered on the other end. "Leona." "Fisk speaking. It's Brody Harlo," he said evenly. "I need your services right away, immediately." "I thought you weren't scheduled to return until sometime next week," she replied, a note of surprise in her tone. "Plans have changed unexpectedly," Brody stated. "Can you meet with me today?" "For you?" "Absolutely. Come to my office in 2 hours." Brody quickly hailed a taxi, giving the driver directions not to the comfortable suburban home where his wife, Melanie, and their 2 children, 60-year-old Trevor and 14-year-old Amelia, supposedly no longer wanted him around, but instead straight to the sleek downtown Atlanta office belonging to one of the most respected and feared divorce attorneys in the entire state. As the cab pulled away from the base and merged into traffic, Brody allowed himself one brief, raw moment of pure emotion. He squeezed his eyes tightly shut as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over him like a powerful wave, threatening to pull him under. Then, drawing on the same mental discipline he had relied upon countless times in the heat of combat, he compartmentalized everything. He pushed the pain aside, locked it away in a separate compartment of his mind, and refocused. This situation was no longer a personal heartbreak, it was now an official mission, and Brody Harlo had never once failed to complete a mission successfully. Leona, Fisk's law office, perfectly reflected both her impressive professional success and her intimidating presence. The space featured gleaming surfaces, sharp modern edge, expensive artwork, and an atmosphere designed to make visitors feel both impressed and slightly off balance. Leona herself matched the environment perfectly. She was immaculately dressed in a tailored power suit that exuded confidence, her platinum blonde hair pulled back into a severe and elegant bun, and her sharp eyes that seemed to calculate a person's worth, strengths, and weaknesses within seconds of them walking through the door. After Brody had laid out the entire situation in clear, factual detail, Leona leaned back in her leather chair with a thoughtful expression. So she waited until you were literally standing on United States soil to deliver that message about changing the locks and declaring it was over. That's impressively cold, even according to my high standards in these kinds of cases. I need to understand exactly what I'm up against here, Brody said firmly, his voice steady. And after that, I need a full range of strategic options laid out clearly. Leona's smile was sharp and predatory, like a seasoned hunter who had just spotted an opportunity. Tell me more about that text you sent in reply. The as you wish part. What exactly did you mean by it? It meant that I fully intend to respect her stated wish to end our marriage, Brody explained calmly. But I will do so entirely on my own terms, with precision and control. Excellent response, Leona said approvingly. The weaker individuals in these situations usually want to desperately salvage something that simply cannot be fixed. But you're clearly not here hoping to win her back, or beg for another chance. No, Brody confirmed, without hesitation. I'm here to win, completely. And decisively? For the next full hour, the two of them worked together meticulously, constructing the very first phase of what Leona dramatically referred to as the nuclear option. By the time Brody finally left her office later that afternoon, he had carefully reviewed and signed a comprehensive stack of legal paperwork. These documents set into motion a carefully timed series of financial freezes, asset protections, and legal maneuvers that would all activate with perfect synchronization at precisely 9 a.m. the following morning. After checking into a nearby hotel room for the night and securing a quiet space to think, Brody made his second important strategic call of the day. This one went to his oldest and most trusted friend, Wyatt Dennis. The two men had grown up together in a small rural town in Pennsylvania, had enlisted in the military around the same time, and although Wyatt had chosen to leave the service about 5 years earlier, their bond remained unbreakable. After quickly catching Wyatt up on the shocking details of the situation, Brody explained, I need discreet but thorough surveillance on my house right away. I have to know exactly who is coming and going at all hours. Wyatt didn't waste time with unnecessary questions. You suspect there's another man involved in all of this? I need solid confirmation along with every possible detail, Brody replied. I'm counting on you. I'm already on it, brother, Wyatt assured him. And for what it's worth, I'm truly sorry this is happening to you. By the time night had fully fallen over Atlanta, Brody's phone began vibrating almost non-stop with incoming calls and messages from Melanie. He let every single one go straight to voicemail without answering. Then the flood of text messages started pouring in. What exactly did you do? Answer your phone right now. You can't just vanish like this without any explanation. At exactly 10:37 p.m., a series of photos arrived from Wyatt. They showed a sleek midnight blue Audi, parked prominently in the driveway of what used to be Brody's family home. A tall, well-dressed man with expensively styled hair was seen exiting the vehicle and being greeted enthusiastically by Melanie at the front door. The final image captured them, sharing a warm, lingering embrace right there in the doorway. Not the nervous excitement of brand-new lovers, but the comfortable, intimate familiarity of a relationship that had clearly been established for quite some time. Wyatt's accompanying message read, His name is Preston Hayes. He's a successful real estate developer. He's been visiting your house at least 6 times over the past 2 weeks alone. The kids appear to know him quite well already. Brody placed his phone down on the hotel nightstand with deliberate care, his movements slow and controlled. The various pieces of this painful puzzle were beginning to fall neatly into place. With a clear sense of purpose now guiding him, he slept deeply and soundly that night, the restful sleep of a man who finally understood his objective with total clarity. The very next morning, at 9:17 a.m., Brody's phone erupted once again with incoming calls. This time, it wasn't Melanie reaching out. Instead, it was her attorney, a man named Rutherford, whose voice rose several octaves in obvious panic and outrage as he ranted over the line. You have absolutely no legal right to interfere with her trust fund in this manner. 19 missed calls from us, and then you pull a stunt like this. This is nothing short of extortion. You can't possibly think this will hold up. Brody ended the call without saying a single word in response. He turned toward the large window of his hotel room, gazing out at the bustling city below. and allowed himself a small, cold, and satisfied smile. Phase 1 of the operation had been completed successfully. Brody Harlo's remarkable journey from a simple farm boy raised in rural Pennsylvania all the way to becoming a highly decorated member of the elite Army Rangers had been built upon a rare combination of exceptional personal discipline and a natural gift for tactical thinking and strategy. As the youngest of 4 brothers, being raised by a widowed father after their mother passed away early, Brody had learned from a very young age that survival in a tough world required smart planning rather than relying solely on raw physical strength, while his older brothers often depended on brute force to get through challenges. Young Brody quietly developed incredible patience, observation skills, and the ability to think several steps ahead with precision. He first met Melanie Stanford during his initial leave period, right after completing the notoriously difficult Ranger School. At that time, she was a promising student attending law school at the prestigious Georgetown University. Melanie was brilliant, highly ambitious, and came from a well-established wealthy family based in New England. The attraction between them had been powerful and immediate, sweeping them both off their feet in a whirlwind romance. Within just 6 months, they were married in a ceremony that her family accepted, only grudgingly, harboring private reservations about their daughter's choice to build a life with a dedicated military man who would frequently be deployed far away. When their first child, Trevor, was born, Brody happened to be stateside working as a tactical instructor at the time. Those early years felt genuinely good and full of promise. Melanie steadily built her own successful career in law while Brody continued advancing steadily through the ranks of the Ranger units. After their daughter Amelia arrived a couple of years later, the deployments grew noticeably longer, more frequent, and significantly more dangerous. Each time Brody returned home from overseas, he could feel the emotional distance between himself and Melanie widening like a growing chasm. During his second major tour of duty, Melanie's father suddenly passed away, leaving behind a substantial family trust fund that came with complex, almost Byzantine legal conditions attached. One key stipulation stated that her spouse could not access any of the funds without her explicit personal permission. Another important clause specified that if a divorce ever occurred, the money would remain locked in trust until she either remarried or reached the age of 55. What Melanie never fully realized was that Brody, thanks to his tactical mind's deep obsession with understanding complex systems, had spent years quietly studying financial laws, trust structures, and legal loopholes as a personal intellectual hobby. In doing so, he had discovered a subtle but powerful loophole in her father's trust documents, one that even the expensive team of lawyers hired by her family had completely overlooked. It involved a provision for the temporary reassignment of management rights during any period when either spouse abandoned the shared domicile by sending that harsh text message. Precisely while Brody was still in the process of returning from his deployment, Melanie had unknowingly triggered the clause herself. Brody had not touched even a single penny of her inherited money, but through legal channels he had successfully frozen the entire trust fund, effectively preventing any withdrawals, transfers, or major changes until the matter was resolved. "Now, we're getting somewhere," Leona said during their follow-up meeting a short time later, as she slid a thick folder across her polished desk toward him. "You are absolutely correct in your suspicions. Preston Hayes is far more than just your wife's recent lover. The two of them have actually known each other since well before your marriage even began. He was her serious ex-boyfriend back during their law school days." Brody nodded slowly, unsurprised by the revelation. The timing lined up perfectly based on extensive credit card records, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and other digital trails that had been carefully traced. "They reconnected approximately 18 months ago," Leona continued. "It happened shortly after you departed for your most recent and longest tour. While you were out there clearing dangerous buildings, leading high-risk missions, and watching close friends make the ultimate sacrifice, Melanie was quietly rebuilding her personal life with someone else, a man who had apparently been patiently waiting in the wings for years." "And what about my children?" Brody asked, his voice showing a rare crack of genuine emotion for the first time during their conversation. Leona's usually stern expression softened, just a little. "The Preston fellow has been stepping into a father-like role quite actively. There have been weekend trips, expensive gifts, and plenty of time spent together. Your son Trevor seems somewhat resistant to the whole situation. His social media posts suggest he's feeling angry and confused toward both adults involved. Your daughter Amelia, on the other hand, appears to be more accepting of the new dynamic. At least on the surface." Brody absorbed every word, his jaw tightening noticeably as he processed the information. What about the house itself? Has she taken out any new mortgages or additional loans against it? No major new loans yet, Leona replied. But there is something quite interesting about the property right next door to yours. It was quietly purchased 6 months ago by one of Preston Hayes' shell companies. The timing strongly suggests they may have been planning to eventually combine the two lots into one large estate. The various pieces clicked together perfectly in Brody's sharp mind. This wasn't merely a simple affair driven by momentary passion. It looked more like a complete, calculated replacement strategy. Hayes wasn't just trying to take Brody's place in the family, he was literally preparing to move in next door and absorb Brody's entire physical living space as well. They're remarkably efficient about it, Brody remarked with cold detachment. Most affairs tend to be impulsive and messy. This one feels meticulously planned out over a long period. Leona nodded in agreement. The good news for our side is that they have already made several significant mistakes along the way. For example, Hayes transferred $200,000 directly to Melanie about 3 months ago. She used a large portion of that money to completely redecorate the interior of your shared house. Since that was marital property being altered with funds from her paramour, it creates strong leverage. Additionally, she has been covering many household expenses from your joint bank account, even while actively maintaining this secret relationship. Brody nodded thoughtfully. That's useful information, but it's still not quite enough on its own. I need you to dig deeper and find something substantial that will give me real leverage when it comes to custody of the children. Leona raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. You do realize that family courts typically tend to favor mothers in these situations, right? The courts are supposed to favor stability and genuine safety for the children, Brody corrected her firmly. Find me concrete evidence that proves she cannot reliably provide either of those things right now. As Brody left Leona's office later that day, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Wyatt. Got something potentially big here. Meet me at our usual spot as soon as you can. The usual spot was a small, unassuming diner located on the quieter outskirts of Atlanta, a place where the two friends had met many times during past military leaves for private conversations. When Brody arrived and slid into the back booth, he immediately noticed Wyatt sitting there with his posture still perfectly straight and military-like, even though he now wore civilian clothes. How bad is it? Brody asked, directly as he settled. Depends on how you define bad, Wyatt replied grimly, sliding a small encrypted flash drive across the table. Your wife and her boyfriend haven't just been playing house behind your back. They're actively planning a full relocation to Costa Rica. There are documented property purchases, inquiries about international schools for both kids, flight bookings, the whole detailed package. The move is scheduled for next month, right after the new school year begins. The children still have no idea about any of it. Brody pocketed the flash drive carefully. How exactly did you manage to obtain this information? Wyatt offered a grim smile. Let's just say that Mr. Hayes really needs to invest in much better cybersecurity for his various cloud accounts. Brody nodded, his mind already processing the new intelligence at high speed. His family wasn't simply moving on emotionally without him. They had been planning to physically disappear to another country, potentially cutting him out of his children's lives entirely. The cold resolve inside him hardened even further into something unbreakable. I need one additional favor, Brody said quietly. I need temporary access to our old house. Not to create a confrontation, but simply to retrieve something that rightfully belongs to me. Wyatt studied his friend's face carefully for a long moment. Brody, whatever larger plan you're putting together here, ... it's necessary. Brody finished the sentence for him. Are you still with me on this, or not? Their eyes locked in that silent, wordless communication that only comes from men who have faced life and death situations together in combat. Always, Wyatt finally answered. Just remember who you truly are deep down. Brody's smile was faint and didn't quite reach his eyes this time. That's precisely what I'm counting on them having forgotten. Later that same night, under the cover of darkness, the family house appeared almost exactly as Brody remembered it from the exterior. A spacious and elegant colonial-style home situated in an exclusive, well-maintained suburban neighborhood. However, once he gained silent entry using the old set of keys that supposedly no longer worked, the interior told a very different story. The comfortable leather couches he had personally selected years earlier were gone, replaced by sleek, modern furniture in cool shades of gray and blue that felt sterile and impersonal. All of the warm family photographs that had once lined the walls and shelves had been removed entirely. In their place hung abstract, impersonal pieces of modern art. It felt as though Melanie had deliberately attempted to erase every visible trace of their shared life together. Brody moved through the transformed rooms with the silent ghostlight precision he had honed during years of special operations training. He cataloged every single change with detached, professional interest. In the home office area, he located exactly what he had come for, a cleverly hidden wall safe concealed behind one of the new paintings. The combination lock still opened easily using Trevor's birthday, just as he had said it long ago. Inside the safe rested a small, fireproof box containing several cherished items. His grandfather's medals earned during World War II, important documents from his own military career, and one sealed envelope that he had placed there years earlier for potential future need. He removed only the envelope, leaving everything else completely untouched and in its original position. As he prepared to exit, something else on Melanie's desk caught his trained eye, a set of detailed architectural plans. He photographed every page carefully with his phone. The renderings showed ambitious designs for physically connecting their current property with the house next door, effectively creating one massive, combined estate. The date on the documents was 14 months old, placing their creation 4 months into his last overseas deployment. The level of premeditation was staggering. Before departing, Brody made one final quiet stop in each of his children's bedrooms. Trevor's room looked largely unchanged, still filled with sports trophies, gaming posters, and the kind of organized chaos typical of a teenage boy. On his desk sat a single framed photograph that made Brody pause emotionally. It showed him and Trevor on a fishing trip 3 years earlier, both of them smiling widely and happily at the camera. Remarkably, it appeared to be the only visible photo of Brody remaining anywhere in the entire house. Amelia's room, by contrast, had undergone a complete transformation. It was now decorated in sophisticated tones of purple and silver, making it look far more like the private apartment of a college student than the bedroom of a 14-year-old girl. On her bulletin board, among various concert tickets and school awards, hung a prominent photo of Amelia, Melanie, and Preston together at what looked like an upscale ski resort. They appeared every bit like a happy, complete family unit enjoying quality time. Brody left the house as silently and undetected as he had entered it. Before closing the door behind him, he placed the old set of house keys deliberately on the kitchen counter, in plain sight, keys that Melanie had believed would no longer grant access. She would discover them there soon enough. The following morning, Brody met with Harris Bentley, a former intelligence officer who had transitioned into high-level private investigation work. Wyatt had strongly recommended him. "I need comprehensive information on Preston Hayes," Brody explained clearly. "Not just the polished public surface. I need to know every single thing he might be hiding beneath that image." Harris, a slight man with unusually penetrating and intelligent eyes, nodded without hesitation. "Everyone hides something if you look deep enough. How far do you want me to dig?" "All the way down," Brody replied. While Harris began his thorough investigation, Brody moved forward with the next calculated phase of his overall strategy. He reached out to Trevor's lacrosse coach and arranged what would appear to be a completely accidental encounter with his son right after practice one afternoon. When Trevor emerged from the fieldhouse carrying his gear, he stopped dead in his tracks at the unexpected sight of his father standing there. "Dad!" The teenager's voice cracked with a mixture of shock and uncertainty. "Mom said. She told us you weren't coming back at all." "I'm here now, son," Brody said simply, keeping his tone steady and warm. Trevor's face shifted rapidly through a whirlwind of emotions, shock, confusion, and then visible anger. "Where have you even been these past few days? It's been almost 4 full days since you landed back in the country." "I needed some time to get a few critical things organized first," Brody explained. "Your mother made it very clear through her message that I wasn't welcome at the house anymore." Trevor looked away, kicking at the ground with his cleat. "She told us that you had basically abandoned the family. That you chose the Rangers and the military life over us every single time. Is that the reason you didn't want to see me?" Brody asked gently. "I never said anything like that," Trevor replied, his head snapping up suddenly. "She told us you wanted a completely clean break, with no messy goodbyes or anything." Brody maintained a carefully neutral facial expression despite the fresh surge of anger rising inside him. "I understand now. Are you and your mom planning to get divorced?" "It certainly looks that way," Brody confirmed. "Because of Preston?" Trevor asked bluntly. "Partly because of him, yes." "I really hate him," Trevor muttered under his breath. "He?" Acts like he's doing us all some huge favor by being around it. Melly seems to buy into it completely, but I don't trust him for a second. The father and son talked together for a solid 30 minutes. Brody was extremely careful not to speak negatively about Melanie, but he did work gently to correct several of the false assumptions Trevor had been living with, revealing that many of them stemmed directly from carefully crafted lies. When Melanie's familiar SUV eventually pulled into the parking lot to pick Trevor up, Brody stood up to leave. "I have to go now. But remember this, Trevor, no matter what ultimately happens between your mother and me, I will always remain your father. That fact will never change." As Brody began walking away, Trevor called out after him with a mix of hope and challenge in his voice. "Dad, are you seriously just going to let him take everything away from us?" Brody turned back one last time, his expression calm and unreadable. "Okay, no, son. I'm not going to let that happen." Later that same evening, Harris Bentley arrived with his initial findings from the deeper investigation into Preston Hayes. "On paper, Preston Hayes looks completely legitimate," Harris began. "He has a string of successful real estate developments, a clean public record, and he's generally well respected within the local business community. However, there are several troubling inconsistencies once you start looking closer. For instance, there are 3 former business partners who suddenly sold their shares to him for pennies on the dollar under suspicious circumstances. Also, a building inspector who abruptly changed careers shortly after approving one of Hayes' more controversial projects. Most interestingly, there's a recurring pattern of him deliberately targeting wealthy married women as potential investors, especially during times when their husbands are frequently absent due to military service, international business travel, or political commitments. He positions himself first as a friendly confidant, then as a trusted business advisor, and eventually the husband is removed from the picture through divorce or other means. Hayes then maintains access to the family's wealth through the wife." Brody leaned forward with heightened interest. "Go on." "The planned move to Costa Rica raises even more red flags," Harris continued, his expression growing darker. "Hayes does own property there, but he also has documented connections to some less reputable enterprises in the region. The specific area where he's been buying land is well known as a convenient haven for individuals looking to quietly disappear from financial debts or legal obligations back home. It looks like he's planning to isolate Melanie completely, getting her far away from her support network of family and friends, as well as from the familiar protections of the U.S. legal system. So he's planning to isolate her and gain full control," Brody concluded. "Possibly. The timeline they're working with is quite aggressive. The paperwork for transferring ownership of your current house is already in motion and scheduled to close within the next 3 weeks." Brody nodded, understanding the urgency. "That's why she pushed so hard for a quick divorce. They're trying to liquidate assets and disappear before anyone can intervene. There's one more important detail," Harris added. "That sealed envelope you retrieved from the hidden safe in the house. What exactly was inside it?" "Insurance," Brody replied simply. "Something I had suspected might become necessary one day." The envelope contained carefully documented proof of a private agreement Brody had made with Melanie's father shortly before the older man's death, in exchange for Brody agreeing to sign a prenuptial agreement that strictly limited his future claims on the family money. Melanie's father had promised to establish a separate protective trust for Brody's own military earnings and benefits. The agreement had been properly notarized at the time, but had never been officially filed alongside the main family trust documents. This additional piece of leverage, when combined with the damaging findings from Harris's investigation, provided Brody with exactly what he needed to escalate to the next phase. He picked up the phone and called Leona. "I'm ready to make my next major move. Please set up a direct meeting with Melanie and her lawyer for tomorrow afternoon. They're already demanding that you unfreeze the trust fund immediately," Leona warned him. "Tell them I'm fully prepared to discuss reasonable terms," Brody replied confidently. "Conference room at your office, 2 o'clock. And if they try to refuse, they won't refuse," Brody said with quiet certainty. Melanie has a strict timeline she needs to keep. Chapter 5. The Painful Awakening. The atmosphere inside the law firm's conference room was thick with palpable tension the following afternoon. Melanie sat directly across the polished table from Brody, her once familiar and beloved face now hardened into a mask of cold disdain and defensiveness. Seated beside her was her silver-haired attorney, Rutherford, who projected an air of cultivated professional outrage. In contrast, Leona Fisk appeared remarkably relaxed and almost subtly amused by the unfolding drama. This entire situation amounts to nothing less than harassment and blatant financial abuse. Rutherford began his opening statement aggressively. Your client has maliciously interfered with assets that are explicitly excluded from any marital property considerations. Leona responded with a calm, knowing smile. My client has simply exercised a perfectly legitimate legal option that was directly triggered by Mrs. Harlo's own impulsive actions. Perhaps if she had waited until he was actually physically home from deployment before changing all the locks and barring him from his own residence, we might not be forced to have this uncomfortable conversation today. Melanie's eyes narrowed sharply as she stared at Brody for the first time. You weren't supposed to return for at least another full week. Deployment schedules can change unexpectedly, Brody replied in an even, controlled tone. But it seems your own plans were already well underway, regardless of my exact return date, weren't they? What plans are you even talking about? Rutherford interjected quickly, attempting to regain control of the narrative. Without saying another word, Brody slid a thick folder containing printed documents across the table toward them. The contents included detailed records of property purchases in Costa Rica, school enrollment applications for both children, and booked airline tickets. The color visibly drained from Melanie's face as she flipped through the pages with trembling hands. How did you possibly... You're planning to take my children, our children, out of the country without my prior knowledge or legal consent. Brody continued steadily. That qualifies as parental kidnapping under federal law. It's merely a vacation property, Melanie snapped back defensively. And you've been absent for the majority of their lives anyway. Absence while serving my country honorably, Brody corrected her without raising his voice. Not absent by personal choice. You always had choices, Melanie's carefully maintained. Composure finally began to crack. Every single time you chose to re-enlist, every special assignment you volunteered for. You picked the Rangers and the military over your own family every single time. And you chose Preston Hayes long before my last deployment even began, Brody countered calmly. 14 months ago, to be exact, right around the time when you first commissioned those architectural plans to physically connect our property with his neighboring lot. Rutherford cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly sensing the conversation slipping away from him. Perhaps we should refocus this discussion strictly on the immediate issue of the frozen trust fund. I am prepared to unfreeze the trust, Brody announced. But I have two specific conditions that must be met first. Melanie. Visible relief was immediate but extremely short-lived as she waited to hear the details. First condition, Brody stated. The children must remain here in Atlanta through the end of the current school year. We will establish a standard joint custody arrangement. There will be no international relocations of any kind without full court approval. Rutherford nodded reluctantly. That seems like a reasonable request under the circumstances. Second condition, Brody continued, turning his gaze directly to Melanie. I want the complete truth from you, not about the affair itself, but specifically about what you told our children regarding my supposed abandonment. Melanie's jaw tightened noticeably. I have no idea what you're referring to. You told them that I had willingly abandoned the family, Brody said quietly but firmly. That I no longer wanted to see them or be part of their lives. You lied to them about my feelings. I was only trying to protect them from getting hurt even more, Melanie retorted, her voice rising slightly. What exactly was I supposed to tell then? That their father might come home in a body bag someday. Don't worry about it. You lied to them deliberately, Brody repeated. Trevor never once said he didn't want to see me. Neither did Amelia. That manipulation came entirely from you. The entire room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Even Rutherford appeared visibly troubled by the revelation. I want you to correct the record with them as soon as possible, Brody continued. Tell them the full and honest truth about what happened. Only then can we seriously discuss unfreezing the trust fund. And if I refuse to do that, Melanie challenged him. Brody slid a second document across the table, the notarized agreement he had made with her late father. Then this gets officially filed with the trust administrators right away. Your father made certain private promises to me that actually supersede the protections outlined in your prenuptial agreement. Melanie's face turned deathly pale as she read through the document. Dad would never have done something like this behind my back. Your father deeply respected military service and personal sacrifice, Brody explained. He also clearly recognized that you had inherited quite a bit of his own ruthless ambition. This agreement served as his personal insurance policy against exactly the kind of scenario we find ourselves in today. After 30 long seconds of tense silence, Melanie finally nodded once. sharply. Fine. I'll tell them the truth. But understand this clearly, Brody, none of it changes my decision. I am still proceeding with the divorce. I wouldn't have it any other way, Brody replied with cool detachment. That same evening, Brody received a text message from Trevor. Mom, finally. Told us what really happened with everything? Why didn't you call or reach out to us yourself sooner? Brody typed back carefully. I needed to be completely certain that I could still be a consistent and reliable part of your lives before making any promises I might not be able to keep. The reply came quickly. Are you really back for good this time? No more deployments from now on. There was a long pause before the next message. Melia is really mad at Mom right now. She's been crying in her room for a while. Brody's chest tightened with a mix of pain and protectiveness. Please tell her that I'll see both of you this weekend at my place. You have a new place already? Trevor asked. I will by Saturday. Brody assured him. The next phase of the plan was accelerating much faster than even Brody had anticipated. He needed to secure a stable new residence quickly and establish a sense of normalcy and security for the children. But first and foremost, he needed to neutralize the threat posed by Preston Hayes once and for all. Harris Bentley's deeper investigation had uncovered even more concerning patterns in Hayes' business activities. His entire model appeared to revolve around a sophisticated form of real estate-related fraud. He would purchase properties through multiple layers of shell companies, artificially inflate their values through cosmetic renovations and manipulated professional appraisals, and then sell them to investment groups that often included his romantic partners or members of their extended family trusts. It's not always technically illegal if all parties are fully informed about the risks, Harris explained during their next meeting. But Hayes deliberately obscures or hides critical details and risks. 3 of his previous romantic partners ended up losing millions of dollars before they fully realized what had happened. And in Melanie's case, she has already transferred approximately $1.2 million from her trust fund into his latest so-called development project, the one located in Costa Rica. The physical property exists in a basic sense, but the permits, planned infrastructure, and projected financial returns are largely smoke and mirrors designed to mislead investors. Brody processed the information carefully. So his ultimate plan is to lure both her and her substantial money down to Costa Rica, where U.S. financial regulations and oversight basically don't apply. Exactly, Harris confirmed. And once she's there, isolated from her usual support network and familiar legal protections, she would become completely dependent on him. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, a small flicker of genuine concern for Melanie's well-being passed through Brody's lingering anger. Despite everything she had done, she remained the mother of his 2 children. She had betrayed him thoroughly and deliberately, but it was now becoming clear that she might also be the victim of someone equally skilled at manipulation and deception. I need concrete evidence that will hold up strongly in court, Brody decided. And we need to move on this quickly before they can cover their tracks any further. What exactly are you planning to do next? Harris asked with professional curiosity. I'm going to give Preston Hayes exactly what he thinks he wants, Brody replied with a measured smile. Or at least what he believes he wants. Chapter 6. The Careful Unraveling. Preston Hayes had carefully built his entire adult life around taking calculated risks and his uncanny ability to read people accurately. He took great personal pride in his skill at identifying emotional or vulnerabilities in others and then exploiting those weaknesses with smooth finesse and charm. So when the inconvenient husband, Brody Harlo, the man who was supposed to be efficiently dispatched through a quick, clean, and uncontested divorce, suddenly requested a private direct meeting at Hayes' impressive downtown office, curiosity ultimately won out over any initial sense of caution. Mr. Harlo, Hayes greeted him with polished professional cordiality as he rose from behind his large, imposing executive desk. This visit is certainly unexpected. Brody took a moment to size up the man who had been sleeping with his wife for an extended period. Hayes was tall and reasonably athletic in build, but he carried a noticeable softness around the edges that came from a life of comfort rather than hardship. He exuded the practiced charm of someone who was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted through persuasion and manipulation. I thought it was finally time for us to speak directly, Brody said. Man to man, without lawyers or intermediaries involved. I can appreciate that straightforward approach, Hayes replied, gesturing toward a comfortable chair. Although I'm not entirely sure what there is left for us to discuss at this point. Melanie has already made her personal decision very clear. That's precisely the reason I'm here, Brody said, choosing to remain standing. I want to acknowledge her decision openly and propose a practical solution that could potentially benefit everyone involved without unnecessary prolonged conflict. Hayes' expression remained carefully neutral, but his posture shifted subtly, indicating heightened alertness. I'm listening carefully. You want Melanie? Brody stated flatly and without emotion. You want the house? You want the ready-made family unit? I've come to accept that reality. However, the current path we're on involving lawyers, court battles, and drawn-out legal proceedings will likely drag on for many months, if not years. In the end, nobody truly wins in that scenario. What I'm suggesting instead is a much cleaner break for all parties. Hayes studied him intently, clearly searching for any hidden trap or weakness. That's surprisingly reasonable coming from you. Melanie had described you as someone who would be uncompromising and difficult. Military service teaches a person to accurately recognize battles that simply cannot be won. Brody replied evenly. It also teaches the value of strategic repositioning when necessary. I see, Hayes said, leaning back in his chair. And what exactly would this proposed financial settlement look like in practical terms? $2 million, Brody stated. That amount represents only a small fraction of what prolonged and aggressive litigation would ultimately cost you in legal fees, lost time, and damaged reputation. You seem remarkably confident about the potential costs of litigation, Hayes noted, a hint of suspicion creeping into his voice. Brody offered a slight shrug. I've done very thorough research on every aspect of this situation. Something in Brody's calm, assured tone caused Hayes to pause for a brief moment. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before his confident mask slipped back into place. I'll need to discuss these terms with Melanie first. Of course. Of course, Brody agreed. But please understand that this particular offer comes with a strict time limit. You have 24 hours to respond. That's not very much time to make such significant decisions, Hayes protested mildly. I was under the impression that you were a man who fully understood the importance of moving quickly when a genuine opportunity presents itself. Brody replied before turning to leave the office. Immediately after Brody departed, Hayes picked up his phone and called Melanie to relay the entire conversation in detail. What neither of them realized was that Harris Bentley, with assistance from a building maintenance worker who owed Wyatt a significant favor, had successfully installed sophisticated surveillance equipment inside Hayes' office the previous night. The recording captured every word clearly. He's sounding desperate, Hayes told Melanie over the speakerphone. This development is actually perfect for us. We can wrap up all the loose ends cleanly and be comfortably settled in Costa Rica before winter sets in. It feels almost too easy, Melanie's voice replied, sounding cautious. Brody doesn't usually give up without a real fight. He's a trained soldier, not a businessman. He's completely out of his depth here. You don't know him the way I do, Hayes reassured her smoothly. He's playing some kind of angle. But even if he is, what can he realistically do at this point? The trust fund has already been unfrozen. The house sale is proceeding on schedule. We have every piece of the plan in full motion. What about the children? Melanie asked, a note of concern entering her voice. We'll honor the temporary custody arrangement until we're fully ready to make the move, Hayes explained. By that time, he'll be settled into whatever new life he creates for himself. And the kids will naturally prefer our situation anyway, especially with the excellent private school options available in Costa Rica. And if he tries to legally contest the international relocation later, it will already be too late to stop us. Trust me on this, Mel. This is exactly what we've been carefully working toward for so long. Everything is finally falling perfectly into place. The recording captured the entire conversation, including the casual discussion of violating future custody agreements, the calculated manipulation of Melanie, and the clear intent to move forward with the fraudulent investment scheme in Costa Rica had provided Brody with precisely the additional evidence he had been seeking. The very next day, Brody received a call from Hayes, formally accepting the proposed terms, with a meeting scheduled for the following morning to sign all necessary paperwork. That evening, Brody met with Leona to carefully finalize their comprehensive counter-strategy. This is walking on very thin legal ice, Leona warned him as she reviewed the detailed plan one final time. A judge could potentially view that recorded conversation as a form of entrapment. The recording itself is only serving as backup insurers, Brody assured her confidently. The real strength lies in the documented financial evidence of fraud, the misrepresented investments, and the clear pattern of behavior. We simply needed Hayes to verbally confirm his true intentions regarding my children. And yes, I'm certain. I want to give Melanie one final warning before everything unfolds. After everything she has put you through? Leona asked, surprised. Brody's expression hardened with resolve. This stopped being solely about Melanie quite some time ago. It's now primarily about protecting my children from both of them, and the dangerous situation they were heading into. All of the necessary pieces had now been carefully positioned. Phase 3 of the operation would officially begin at 9 a.m. the next morning. Exactly at the moment when Preston Hayes believed he was about to cement his complete victory. That night, however, Brody received an unexpected and emotional visitor at his hotel room door. It was Amelia. She stood in the hallway looking tear-streaked, defiant, and vulnerable all at once. "Mom has no idea that I'm here," she blurted out immediately. "Trevor helped me sneak out without being noticed." Brody quickly ushered his daughter inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of concern and love. "Amelia, you really can't just leave the house like this without anyone knowing. Why didn't you fight harder for us?" she demanded, her voice breaking with emotion. "You just disappeared completely after you got back. You didn't even try to come see us right away. I was told very clearly that you and your brother didn't." "Want to see me?" Brody explained gently, kneeling down to her eye level. "And you actually believed that?" Amelia asked, tears welling up again. "After everything we've been through, I wrote letters to you every single week while you were deployed. I sent emails whenever you could receive them. I waited so patiently for you to finally come home, and then ... nothing. It felt like you had forgotten about us." Brody looked at his daughter and saw clearly for the first time just how much she had grown and matured during his long absence. "I'm fighting for you and your brother right now. I promise you that, with everything I have. Mom is selling our house," Amelia continued. "We're supposed to be moving away soon." "No, you're not moving away," Brody said firmly. "Not unless you and Trevor genuinely want that for yourselves." Amelia studied her father's face intently. "Preston keeps saying that you can't stop any of this from happening. He says you've already signed legal papers giving everything away." "Preston doesn't have any idea what's actually coming," Brody replied carefully. "What does that even mean?" she asked, searching his eyes. "It means that sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be on the surface," Brody explained. "And sometimes the full truth has to come out into the open before more people get seriously hurt." "Are you planning to hurt Preston?" Amelia's eyes widened with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Not in any physical way," Brody assured her quickly. "But yes, I am going to stop him from taking what rightfully belongs to our family, including you and your brother." Amelia nodded slowly, processing his words. "Good. I actually hate him now. He acts really nice whenever Mom is around, but when she's not watching, he's completely different." Brody felt a cold wave of rage settle deep in his chest. "Different? In what way exactly?" "He talks to us like we're stupid or annoying," Amelia said. "He tells Trevor that he needs to man up and stop missing you so much. He told me that I have to adjust to the new reality because you never really cared about us that much anyway. And last week, he grabbed Trevor's arm really hard when Trevor argued back about something. He left visible marks. The cold, controlled rage that Brody had been carefully managing for days finally crystallized into something sharp and lethal." "When exactly did that incident happen?" "Last Thursday night," Amelia replied. "Trevor wouldn't let him into his room, and they got into a big argument. Does Mom know about it?" Amelia shook her head. "Trevor didn't want to tell her. He thought it would only make everything worse." Brody took a deep, steadying breath and recalibrated his entire plan in that moment. "I need you to go back home now. But I promise you that tomorrow everything is going to start changing for the better. You have my word on that." After ensuring Amelia returned home safely with Wyatt's discreet assistance so she wouldn't be detected, Brody made one final urgent call to Leona. "We need to accelerate the entire timeline," he told her. "And we should add one more important component to our overall strategy." "What's changed since we last spoke?" she asked. "Everything," Brody replied with quiet intensity. "Hayes has now crossed a line that he can never uncross." Chapter 7. The Day of Reckoning. The corporate offices of Hayes Development Group occupied the entire 27th floor of one of Atlanta's most prestigious business towers. The space was designed with abundant glass, polished chrome accents, and an overall aesthetic of calculated power and intimidation. When Brody arrived precisely at 9 a.m. for the scheduled meeting, Preston Hayes was already waiting in the large conference room, flanked by two of his attorneys and wearing a smug, triumphant smile. "Mr. Harlo," Hayes greeted him smoothly, extending his hand in a gesture of false camaraderie. "I truly appreciate your sense of pragmatism in handling this delicate matter." Brody ignored the outstretched hand completely. "Where is Melanie? She should be present for this." Hayes' smile tightened noticeably at the edges. "Melanie trusted me to handle all of the financial aspects on her behalf. You'll join us later for the final signature portion." "That arrangement won't work for me," Brody stated calmly but firmly. "I need every involved party physically present before we proceed with anything." One of Hayes' attorneys, a younger man who already looked nervous, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Hayes assured us that Mrs. Harlo had personally approved all of these proposed terms. Did she approve them in writing?" Brody asked directly. "I hold her power of attorney for all business-related matters," Hayes interjected smoothly, attempting to regain control. "This isn't strictly a business matter," Brody corrected him. "This is a divorce settlement that directly affects the future of my children. Either Melanie attends this meeting in person, or we will need to reschedule for a time when she is available." Hayes' jaw tightened visibly for a moment before he forced another artificial smile onto his face. "Of course. Let me call her right now and ask her to come over immediately." As Hayes stepped away briefly to make the phone call in private, the conference room door opened once again. Leona Fisk entered, followed closely by a stern-looking man wearing a conservative dark suit. "Mr. Harlo, I apologize for our slight delay," Leona said briskly. "Agent Donovan was held up in traffic this morning." Hayes snapped his head around from his phone conversation, his expression shifting from annoyance to sudden alarm. "Franklin Donovan, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division." The man introduced himself calmly, placing his official credentials openly on the conference table. "I'm here today strictly as an official observer at this stage." The attorneys representing Hayes exchanged rapid, alarmed glances across the table. "What exactly is going on here?" Hayes demanded, his voice losing some of its earlier smoothness as he returned to his seat. "This wasn't part of any agreed agenda. Consider it necessary insurance," Brody replied without raising his voice. "Is Melanie on her way now?" "She should arrive within the next 20 minutes, Hayes confirmed, though his previously confident demeanor was now clearly strained and cracking. "Perfect timing," Brody interrupted. "That gives us just enough time to review some additional, important documents that I brought with me today." Leona distributed thick folders containing compiled evidence to everyone seated around the table. These materials thoroughly document a clear and repeated pattern of securities fraud, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy spanning more than 7 years and involving multiple states, she explained. Hayes let out a short, hollow laugh that lacked any real conviction. "This is completely absurd. It's nothing more than a transparent and desperate attempt at extortion." "No extortion is involved here," Brody said calmly. "Only documented facts. You have defrauded several previous romantic partners through carefully manipulated real estate investment schemes. You are currently attempting to do the exact same thing with my wife and her family trust fund. And most recently, you have physically assaulted my 16-year-old son." Hayes' face drained of all color. "That's an outrageous lie. I never laid a hand on." "We have clear photographs of the resulting bruises," Brody cut him off firmly, "along with detailed witness statements." At that precise moment, the conference room door opened once more as Melanie finally arrived. She looked confused and increasingly alarmed as she took in the unexpected scene, the FBI agent, the folders of evidence, and the sudden shift in atmosphere. "What's happening here?" she demanded, her eyes darting between Hayes and Brody. "Preston, why is there an FBI agent present in this meeting?" "Mrs. Harlo." Agent Donovan acknowledged her politely. "Please take a seat and join us. We were just beginning to discuss your recent investment in the Costa Rica development project." "My investment?" Melanie looked toward Hayes for clarification. "What investment are they talking about?" "The $1.2 million transfer that you personally authorized approximately 3 weeks ago," Brody supplied. "It was directed toward the so-called Villa Paraiso development." Melanie froze in place. "That wasn't framed as any kind of investment. That was supposed to be the purchase price for our future retirement home." "There is no actual retirement home," Brody explained gently but directly. "The so-called development exists primarily on paper and in carefully crafted marketing materials. The specific parcel of land you believe you purchased is an essentially undeveloped piece of property currently valued at less than $100,000. "That's simply not possible," Melanie protested, her voice rising. Preston showed me all of the detailed plans, the professional photographs, the architectural renderings. Leona interjected smoothly, sliding additional official documents across the table toward Melanie. Here are the actual public property records, the complete lack of necessary building permits, and the banking transfer trails showing exactly where your money was redirected. Melanie slowly sank into an empty chair, staring at the mounting pile of evidence in front of her with dawning horror. Preston. Please tell me that none of this is true. Hayes' carefully constructed mask of confidence shattered completely in that moment. Melanie, this is all just a serious misunderstanding. The development project is still in its very early planning stages. The development doesn't exist in any meaningful way, Agent Donovan stated flatly, cutting through the denial. We have been actively investigating Mr. Hayes and his business activities for the past 18 months. Your husband's evidence has simply helped accelerate our official timeline. Melanie's head snapped up sharply as she looked directly at Brody. You knew about all of this? I began suspecting that something was seriously wrong when I first saw the Costa Rica architectural plans. Brody replied. The deeper investigation confirmed every detail. So this entire meeting was nothing more than an elaborate trap. Hayes spat angrily, his composure gone. You set both of us up. No, Brody corrected him calmly. I set you up. Melanie has been every bit as much a victim of your long-running fraud scheme as your previous partners were. Hayes' attorneys were already hurriedly gathering their belongings and mumbling about the urgent need to consult with senior partners at their firm. And what exactly did you mean earlier about Trevor? Melanie asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. What did you say about an assault? Brody slid a printed photograph across the table, showing Trevor's arm with clear finger-shaped bruises. This happened last Thursday night when Trevor refused to let him enter his bedroom during an argument. Melanie stared at the photograph for several long seconds, then slowly turned her gaze toward Hayes. Horror and betrayal washed across her face. You physically hurt my son? He was being disrespectful and argumentative, Hayes protested weakly. I barely even grabbed his arm. The sharp sound of a slap echoed loudly through the conference room as Melanie's open palm connected forcefully with Hayes' face. You lying bastard. You promised me repeatedly that you would never Mrs. Harlo, Agent Donovan interjected professionally. I strongly suggest that we continue this entire discussion down at our field office. We will need formal, detailed statements from both you and your son as soon as possible. What followed next became a rapid blur of coordinated activity. Preston. Hayes was promptly escorted from the building by 2 additional FBI agents who had been waiting just outside the conference room. Melanie, clearly shell-shocked and emotionally overwhelmed, agreed without resistance to cooperate fully with the ongoing federal investigation. When the room finally emptied, and only Brody, Leona, and Melanie remained, the silence felt heavy and significant. Why? Melanie asked quietly, looking directly at Brody with tears welling in her eyes. After everything I did to you, the betrayal, the lies, the attempt to erase you completely, why would you still choose to protect me from him? I didn't do any of this for you, Brody replied honestly. I did it for Trevor and Amelia. They've already been through far more than any children should have to endure. Melanie nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. What happens now? Now, Brody said as he stood up, you sit down with the children and tell them the complete, unvarnished truth about everything that has happened. Then we can sit down together and discuss practical next steps for co-parenting. As he walked toward the doorway with Leona following closely behind, Melanie called out after him one last time. Did you ever truly love me at all, Brody? Or was I always just another mission objective in your mind? Brody paused briefly at the threshold and turned back. I loved you enough to let you go when I truly believed that was what you wanted. And I loved you enough to step in and stop you when I realized you were being deliberately manipulated into something dangerous. But not enough to forgive what you did. No, Melanie whispered, her voice breaking. Not enough for forgiveness. Brody simply nodded once in agreement before walking out. Chapter 8. The quiet aftermath, 3 weeks later. The entire legal and personal landscape had transformed dramatically. Preston Hayes now faced multiple serious federal charges related to fraud and financial crimes. His various assets had been frozen by court order, and his once sterling professional reputation lay in complete ruins. The FBI investigation had rapidly expanded to include at least 6 additional confirmed victims across 3 different states. Melanie had quietly moved out of the large family home and into a much more modest apartment, while the complex legal entanglements surrounding the property continued to unravel. The grand house now sat empty and silent, awaiting resolution. The family trust fund had been largely rescued through swift and aggressive legal intervention, although not without some permanent losses. The entire Costa Rican property scheme had collapsed entirely under the weight of the federal scrutiny. Brody, meanwhile, had purchased a comfortable 4-bedroom house located just 15 minutes away from the children's school. He had accepted a stable position as a security consultant with a major corporation, a role that provided the consistent presence and financial stability his family now desperately needed, while still allowing him to utilize the valuable skills he had developed during his military career. The custody arrangement had been settled amicably and without the need for a formal court battle. The children would now split their time equally between both parents, with holidays alternating on a fair schedule. Trevor had already enthusiastically claimed the largest bedroom in Brody's new house as mostly mine, while Amelia continued to navigate her complicated and evolving feelings toward both of her parents. On a crisp and beautiful fall Saturday afternoon, Brody sat relaxing on the back deck of his new home, watching Trevor practice various lacrosse moves out in the spacious yard. Amelia was inside the house, ostensibly reading a book, but actually listening carefully to the conversation through the open window. A fact that both Brody and Trevor silently acknowledged and found mildly amusing. Says she's sorry like 100 times every single day now? Trevor said abruptly, pausing his practice and leaning on his lacrosse stick. It's honestly starting to get kind of annoying to hear it so often. She has quite a lot to feel sorry about, Brody replied, carefully, choosing his words with thoughtfulness. Are you ever going to be able to forgive her? Trevor asked directly, looking up at his father. Brody considered the question seriously for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't always a simple or straightforward thing. Trevor, I can work together with her as your mother and maintain a functional co-parenting relationship without necessarily forgiving what she did to our marriage and our family. That feels pretty harsh when you say it like that, Trevor observed. Maybe it does, Brody acknowledged. But some betrayals run so deep that they simply can't be undone or forgotten easily. Trevor twirled the lacrosse stick thoughtfully in his hands. Mom told me that she kinda got caught up in Preston's flashy lifestyle, the money, the connections, the sense of excitement. She said she started feeling important and desired again for the first time in years. And did she feel unimportant when she was with me? Brody asked, genuinely curious about the answer. She said that whenever you were away on long deployments, she felt like she was just waiting endlessly for life to happen, Trevor explained. And that constant waiting scared her a lot. Brody nodded slowly, absorbing the explanation. It wasn't a justification for her actions, but it was at least an honest explanation that he could intellectually understand. Fear had driven people to do desperate and regrettable things. He had witnessed that truth countless times in dangerous combat zones. What about Preston? Trevor asked after a pause. Do you feel even a little bit bad about what ultimately happened to him? No, Brody answered honestly. He physically hurt you. He tried to steal our entire family away. He deserves every consequence that's coming his way. Mom says he might end up going to prison for a really long time, Trevor said quietly. That's usually the standard consequence for serious fraud combined with assault, Brody replied. Trevor was silent for another moment before speaking again. I wanted to tell you about the thing with my arm, but I honestly thought maybe you wouldn't care that much anymore, after everything. The word struck Brody like a physical blow to the chest. He leaned forward and looked directly into his son's eyes. Trevor, listen to me very carefully. There is absolutely nothing at all, in this entire world, that could ever make me stop caring about you or your sister. I will always protect you both. I will always fight for you. Do you understand that clearly? Trevor nodded, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. Yeah, I get it now, Dad. From inside the house, Amelia called out. Dad, Mom just pulled up in the driveway. Melanie stood somewhat awkwardly in the living room when Brody walked inside. He was dressed more simply and authentically than he had seen her in many years. Just jeans, a comfortable sweater, and minimal makeup. The polished, sophisticated corporate attorney image had been replaced by something far more genuine and reminiscent of the woman he had originally fallen in love with so many years earlier. I need to speak with your father alone for a few minutes, she told the children gently. Why don't you both go gather your things for the weekend? Stay. Once the kids had left the room, Melanie looked around the new house slowly. It already felt warm, lived in, and comfortable, clearly becoming a real home. You've done a really good job here, she said softly. The kids seemed genuinely comfortable and happy. They're doing better than they have in quite a few months, Brody acknowledged. Melanie nodded. Trevor's grades have already started improving. Noticeably, Amelia is actually talking to me again without anger in her voice, most days. She paused, gathering her courage. I owe you a real and sincere apology, Brody. Not just the legal maneuvering or the surface-level words. A genuine one. You don't owe me anything at this point, Brody replied. I do, she insisted. I allowed my own deep insecurities and fears to drive me straight into the arms of a skilled predator. I betrayed our marriage vows completely. I lied to our children repeatedly. And I tried my best to erase you entirely from our lives and memories. Her voice cracked with emotion. And despite all of that pain I caused, you still stepped in and saved me from making an even bigger mistake. I saved our children, Brody corrected her gently but firmly. You were simply collateral in that process. Melanie flinched slightly at the bluntness, but nodded in understanding. That's fair, but I am still incredibly grateful, and more remorseful than I can properly express in words. Brody studied the woman he had once built his entire future around. The intense anger that had fueled him so powerfully over the past several weeks had gradually burned down to quiet embers. In its place remained something colder and more permanent, not active hatred, but a fundamental and irreversible severing of what had once been. I accept your apology, he said finally. For the sake of Trevor and Amelia, we will work together to build a functional and respectful co-parenting relationship. But that is the absolute limit of what can exist between us moving forward. Understand completely, Melanie whispered. I didn't come here today expecting any kind of reconciliation or second chance. I needed you to know that I now fully recognize exactly what I carelessly threw away, and I will regret that mistake for the rest of my life. Before Brody could formulate any response, the children returned to the living room carrying their weekend bags. The heavy moment passed quietly. The confession had been made and acknowledged. But true absolution had not been granted. Later that same night, after a relaxed dinner together and several rounds of family board games, both children finally fell asleep peacefully in their new rooms. Brody sat alone on the back deck with a glass of whiskey, reflecting on the day. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Wyatt. How did the conversation with Melanie go tonight? As expected, Brody typed back. Apologies, regrets, the usual. Emotional territory. And you're still holding firm on your boundaries? Wyatt asked. Some betrayals simply cannot be undone or walked back, Brody replied. The phone rang almost immediately. When Brody answered, Wyatt's familiar voice came through. You know, forgiveness isn't always just something you give to the other person. Sometimes it's something you need to give yourself too. Brother, I don't need forgiveness for anything, Brody argued mildly. I need clarity, and I finally have that now. Clarity. Huh? Wyatt chuckled. Is that why you're sitting out there? Alone drinking whiskey at midnight? Brody smiled despite himself. I'm celebrating a hard-fought victory. The mission has been successfully completed. Bullshit, Wyatt said good-naturedly. The mission was always about delivering justice and punishment. Now that it's done, you're not quite sure what comes next in your life. There was undeniable truth in his friend's words. Brody realized that the cold, laser-focused purpose that had driven him relentlessly since reading Melanie's devastating text message had now been fully satisfied. Preston Hayes was facing serious justice. The fraudulent financial schemes had been thoroughly exposed. The children were safe, stable, and beginning the long process of emotional healing. Yet a certain emptiness still lingered in the quiet moments. What exactly do you suggest I do now? Brody asked. Move forward, Wyatt replied simply. Not with Melanie. That chapter has closed permanently. But move forward with the rest of your life. The war is finally over. Brother, it's time to come home for real this time. After hanging up the call, Brody sat with his friend's advice for a long while. The disciplined soldier inside him recognized the deep wisdom in those words. In combat, once a mission was successfully completed, you honored those who had fallen, secured the area, and then prepared yourself mentally for whatever objective came next. You didn't linger unnecessarily on the battlefield once victory had been achieved. He looked up at the clear night sky, gazing at the same stars he had contemplated so many times from remote desert encampments and rugged mountain outposts during his deployments. For the very first time since stepping off that transport plane in Georgia, Brody felt the heavy emotional armor he had been wearing beginning to lift, just a little. It wasn't full forgiveness, not yet, and perhaps never completely. But it was the quiet possibility of something new, something healthier, and something truly his own. 6 months later, the divorce proceedings had been finalized on fair and balanced terms that had been negotiated without lingering animosity or unnecessary drama. The joint custody arrangement had proven successful, and both Trevor and Amelia were clearly thriving under the new stability and consistency in their lives. Preston Hayes had ultimately accepted a plea deal with federal prosecutors. He now faced 8 years in federal prison, along with substantial restitution, requirements that would keep him financially constrained for many decades to come. Brody's security consulting firm had grown steadily and successfully. His unique military expertise continued to prove highly valuable in corporate risk management and protection services. He had even brought 2 additional former Army Rangers onto his growing team, creating a strong brotherhood of support and shared understanding that reminded him daily of the best aspects of his previous service. On a warm and sunny spring afternoon, Brody stood proudly on the sidelines, watching Trevor compete in the state lacrosse championship game. Beside him, Amelia cheered enthusiastically for her older brother. On Amelia's other side, Melanie maintained a respectful and appropriate distance from Brody, close enough to present a united parental front for their son, but far enough to honor the clear emotional boundaries that now existed between them. "He's really developed into a talented player," remarked a pleasant voice from beside Brody. He turned to see an athletic woman with curly brown hair, observing the game with obvious professional interest. "He works extremely hard at it," Brody replied with quiet pride. "Definitely scholarship potential," she commented. "I'm Vanessa, by the way. I'm a college recruiter for Northwestern University." Brody Harlo. He introduced himself. "That's my son out there, number 17. Great stick skills and field awareness." Vanessa noted appreciatively. Their conversation flowed easily and naturally throughout the first half of the game. Vanessa's deep knowledge of lacrosse strategy and recruiting processes was genuinely impressive. When halftime finally arrived, Amelia tugged gently on her father's arm. "Dad, I'm going to get some hot chocolate. Do you want anything?" "Just a bottle of water for me, please," Brody replied, handing her a few dollars. As Amelia walked away, Vanessa smiled warmly. "Smart and considerate, kid. Not always subtle," Brody chuckled, "but definitely smart. They both seem to think you need to start getting back out into the world more," Vanessa observed lightly. "As Trevor puts it so bluntly," Brody added with a smile. Vanessa's question was direct, but kind. "And do you feel like you need to start getting back out there?" 6 months earlier, Brody probably wouldn't have even recognized the opportunity, let alone considered responding positively. Now, however, he found himself actually contemplating the possibility. "I might," he admitted honestly. "Eventually." Vanessa nodded, clearly respecting his measured and thoughtful response. "Well, whenever eventually arrives, maybe we could grab a cup of coffee sometime. We could talk about your son's lacrosse future, ... among other things." She handed him her business card, their fingers brushing lightly for a brief moment. "I'm in town until Sunday if you want to reach out." The game resumed before Brody could offer any immediate reply, but something important had quietly shifted. Inside him, a long closed door had cracked open just enough to let in the possibility of new connections and new chapters he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. After Trevor's team pulled off a dramatic and hard-fought victory in the final minutes, the celebration naturally spilled over into an early family dinner at the teenager's favorite local restaurant. Melanie politely excused herself early, citing some remaining work commitments, leaving Brody alone with both children for the rest of the evening. "Who was that woman you were talking with during the game?" Trevor asked curiously between bites of his burger. "She was a college recruiter from Northwestern," Brody explained. "She was very impressed with the way you played today." "Dad," Trevor rolled his eyes playfully. "She gave you her actual phone number." "I saw the whole thing. It was for recruitment purposes," Brody maintained, though the slight smile on his face betrayed his amusement. "You should definitely call her," Amelia declared with teenage confidence. "She was pretty, and she actually knew a lot about lacrosse. So she's probably smart too." "I'll consider it seriously," Brody conceded with a small laugh. Later that night, after dropping both kids off at Melanie's apartment, Brody returned to his own quiet house. He placed Vanessa's business card thoughtfully on his desk. He wasn't quite ready to act on it yet, but for the first time in a long while he no longer felt the automatic urge to reject the possibility outright, his phone buzzed with a text message from Melanie. "Trevor, Can't stop talking about that Northwestern recruiter. He says she might be the one for you. Just a friendly heads up that our son is already planning your future wedding." Despite himself, Brody laughed out loud at the message. "Thanks for the warning," he texted back. "I'll try to manage his expectations carefully." "You deserve to find real happiness again, Brody," came Melanie's unexpected and sincere reply. "I mean that completely." He stared at the message for a long time, unsure exactly how to respond. Finally, he simply wrote back, "So do the kids. Thank you for being there." Today, it wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't any kind of romantic reconciliation. But it was a small, meaningful acknowledgement that both of them had finally moved beyond the battlefield of their past and into whatever separate but connected future lay. Ahead, two distinct paths forever linked through the two children they both loved deeply. The following morning, Brody woke up early for his usual weekend run. As he laced up his running shoes, he glanced once more at Vanessa's business card still resting on his desk. After a moment of quiet consideration, he picked it up and tucked it safely into his wallet. The long war was finally over. He had successfully protected what mattered most in his life. He had remained completely true to his core principles, never yielding, never compromising on justice, and never fully forgiving those who had betrayed him so deeply. But he also refused to allow bitterness or resentment to consume the rest of his future. As he stepped outside into the soft dawn light and began his run, Brody reflected once more on the single text message that had set everything in motion. "Don't bother coming home. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." His reply at the time had been simple, calm, and loaded with meaning. "As you wish." It had never been an admission of surrender or defeat. It had been the calm, deliberate declaration of a man who fully understood that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is to accept the challenge exactly as presented and then respond decisively on your own carefully chosen terms. The battle had been fought with precision. It had been won decisively. And now, for the first time in many years, Brody Harlo was finally and truly home. This brings our story to its satisfying conclusion. We'd love to hear your honest thoughts, reactions, and opinions in the comments section below. Which part resonated with you the most? Did you see any of these twists coming? Let us know. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. If you enjoyed this detailed story of resilience and justice, please consider subscribing to the Cheating Tailies Lab channel, hitting the notification bell so you never miss a new upload, and checking out the recommended video you see on your screen right now. I'll see you again very soon in the next one. Take care, stay strong, and remember, sometimes the quietest responses carry the most power.